Hello class, for our next assignment I'm going to, for your 8th graders, revisit this Connect 4 game that we made, and for 7th graders for next year I'll incorporate what I'm going to do if you take my class next year, because this is one of my favorite assignments. And what I like about it is it has a lot of little small details that you have to get perfect in order for it to work correctly. So I thought about making a jig, and I'm going to show you how I make a jig, what a jig is used for, and I'm also going to try to improve upon one aspect of this assignment that gave my 8th graders and me a little bit of difficulty last year, and we'll see how it goes. So for our next assignment, I'm going to go over how I'm going to improve on this game for my 7th graders make next year. And for my 8th graders, you'll probably be wondering, Mr. Fessett, why don't you do that for us this year? But that's the way it goes. So enjoy. Okay, the first thing I want to address is this part of the game. This is called the rack. And these pieces that go vertical, they're I-beams, that's what we called it. And the way that we created these I-beams in the last year or in the past is that we cut pieces of oak to length, and then on a router jig, we routered it so that these game pieces would be able to slide into this space. Well, here's my table saw, and I have a dado blade set up for my table saw. Now what that means is I stacked about 4 blades together. So that means when you're making a cut, you're gonna be making a wider channel or a dado in the piece of wood that you want. I don't have a fence on this. I don't have a guard for this. And what I want to be able to achieve with that dado is to take this thin piece of wood and create those I-beams I showed you on my game piece. Now, in order to do that, the thickness of the dado blade is correct for the game pieces, but what I have to do is I have to make a jig that will allow me to do it safely and efficiently. I have this piece of plywood. It's 1/2 inch thick. It's about 1 foot wide, and it's about 24 inches long. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna create a sled with this plywood. And my goal is so that when you cut these I-beams that you will not see this blade at all. You won't have any exposure or access to this blade. So I have to be able to have this sled go over the blade like this, and all you're doing is just pushing it till it stops, and then you bring it back. And I need to create a piece of wood that will go in this track so it slides evenly. Look, these I-beams almost fit perfectly, going back and forth, so that when you push it, it's tracked in place and it's constantly going back and forth, sliding my sled up and down. So here I go. I have this guide that slides pretty good, and it fits right in my track. And what I have to do is I have to attach that guide onto my sled so that when you push it, it slides back and forth. Okay, so I have my sled. It slides real nice. There's no give anywhere, but still it slides nice. And the next part I'm gonna do is I have to actually take that dado blade and cut through this so that the blade can actually come up and cut a dado into this piece as well. All right, the next thing that I want to do is I have this dadoed out, and this piece of wood is going to, remember this is the I-beam, it's going to fit right in the middle of this dado. And what I'm going to do is I have these strips of wood that I ripped, and they're going to go on both sides of this potential I-beam, and I have it so that the thickness is just a little bit more on the I-beams than on these pieces I ripped out. And I'll show you why I have that in a little bit. But right now, what I want to do is I want to line this piece of wood up so it goes right in the middle of that dado cut. Has to be exact, because if I'm cutting out 1,000 of these, or if you're cutting out 1,000 of these as a class, I want them to be uniform and every piece to be exactly the same. So I have to spend some time and make sure that this is centered exactly where I want it to be. Okay, I have these pieces in place. I reinforced it with a couple of screws, but also glued it down. Now what this does is it holds this piece that we're gonna make an I-beam with right in the middle. Now the reason I made this part a little lower than the actual game piece is that I wanna be able to have a clamp. And the clamps just don't be simple. I don't have a hinge on it, and basically it's gonna hold it in place by pushing it down. It'll be wider than this piece of wood I have, but that will keep it locked in place. So the way I'm gonna lock this in this groove right here, so I can put a dado on this game piece, is I have this piece of oak. It's about 6 inches wide by about 10 inches long. And I also have this piano hinge right here. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to attach the piano hinge so it goes right there. So when you open it and close it, it's gonna press on this piece and lock it in place. As long as you keep pressing on it, just with a little bit of pressure, this piece should go nowhere. And there's my I-beam. Very simple. Really clean too, much better than on the router. And so my next step is to make this as safe as possible. Now I put a piece of sandpaper right here so that it doesn't slide around so much if you don't hold it down as tight. I also put a back block or stop right here, so when you put it in, it doesn't slide back. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna put a little fence in front, and then so that you can't slide it too far forward or back, because there's no need to, I'm gonna put some stops on it. So I'll put a stop that will prevent it from going too far forward or from coming back and exposing the blade. Because my goal is obviously to have these cut uniform, but have this blade be hidden. And so that's my next challenge. Well, let me clarify something. I was thinking that it's all right to know where the blade is. I don't want to completely hide it because I want you to be aware of it at all times. So instead of covering up with pieces of wood so you can't really see it, I'm gonna cover it up with this piece of plexiglass. It's a 1/2 inch thick plexiglass, and I'll attach it right here. And that way you can see the blade, but you won't have access to it. So I think that will be a good thing for this sled, to see the blade in action, but not have access to it with your fingers. Here is pretty much a finished product. You can see the plexiglass right here, and if I move this back and forth, you can actually see the blade. Also put a block at the end so that when you are moving it, you can only go so far, so it stops it right there. In this area right here, I'm going to glue in a handle. Just put glue in there. And that just goes right in there. So that way you'll be able to push it forward. It's not quite dry yet. So that way you'll be able to push it forward and back. And then on the very end, right here, so that you don't go too far forward, I'm gonna have to put another stop block right here. And then I'll demonstrate again how it works. Because after I put the block right here, let this dry up, I'll show you exactly how it works, and I'll cut out a bunch of I-beams. All right, my jig for cutting out I-beams like this is completely done. Now let me go over the parts for you so you understand this completely. Again, 8th graders, I apologize. This is much better than doing it on the router, at least I think. Time will tell, you know, I'll do this with the 7th graders and we'll see how it goes. But as far as my test tries, went pretty well. Well, for the first part, I got a plexiglass over the blade so you can see the blade, but you can't get to it. There's no part where your fingers can get to the blade, so that's pretty good. Also, everything locks in place, so all you're doing is sliding it back. It has a stop on the end where it can't go any more than that distance. It has a stop on the front where it can only go that far as well. I'm gonna be writing some directions on this, but what you do is you just take your piece of wood that you'll pre-cut, you insert it in here, you clamp it down, okay? Make sure you're all the way back. Again, I'll go over instructions. Turn it on, hold it down, use the push hold. Pull it back, turn it off. I got one part of the I-beam channeled out with the dado. Insert it again. There. Turn the machine on. Does a pretty nifty job. So that's the jig. And I hope you enjoyed this build. I'm going to be asking you questions about what I did and what the function of this is and where my safety features are as well. So take care, class. I'll talk to you next time.